interesting to note, Alex, that while those supporters are willing to express concerns about Trump's debate performance, they really quickly chalked it up to what they say was an unfair media environment, something that we've heard directly from the former president himself in these last few days since that debate. Alex?
Okay, Jillian Frankel, thank you so much for that report from Las Vegas. Let's bring in Alexi McCammon, the MSNBC political analyst and host of the In Sync with Alexi podcast, and Tim Miller, MSNBC political analyst, writer-at-large for The Bulwark and host of The Bulwark podcast. Good to see you both. Let's get into this because the debate over future debates is certainly heating up. Vice President Harris, of course, saying she's ready for a rematch. At first, Donald Trump insisted there will not be one, but then yesterday, Trump said he might participate if he got in the right mood. So, hey, Tim, what does that even mean? But I guess the legit question is, would it be in Trump's best interest?
That's a good question. Would it be in Trump's best interest? I mean, I think it would if he is able to control himself. He couldn't do any worse than he did in the first debate, right? And so, I think that if he wanted to present a view to some of the, there are gettable voters out there for him that were watching that debate. You see this in focus groups. You saw it in our focus groups at the Bulwark. You saw it in focus groups at other media outlets that went into that debate maybe thinking that they had concerns about him and were open to voting for him. And then they watched it, and he reinforced all the things that they didn't like about him, all of their concerns. And so they came away, more in Kamala Harris's camp. And so, I think it would make sense for him to do it to try to win those people back. And also, to me, it's just, I don't know how you can run as the alpha tough guy male candidate who has Hulk Hogan and the UFC guy at his convention, and then also be the person that's scared to look at Kamala Harris in the face and scared to debate her again. I just think it undermines one of his core arguments in a big way, and I think that Kamala Harris will continue to troll him about it if he decides to wimp out.
That was an extraordinary detail that you mentioned. He did not look at her once. That was just wild.
Yeah.
Well, she looked at him, looked at the camera, had a normal conversation between people. Alexi, the majority of the news outlets and pundits, actually on both sides of the aisle, say Harris won. So why does the campaign want to debate Trump again? I mean, are they that confident that they could, shellac him a second time or something?
They, of course, have room to grow with other voters who either weren't checked into the first debate or still might be on the fence, who want to hear maybe a more substantive policy debate on certain issues. I don't think gun control was mentioned or asked about in a really deep way at the debate. And so that's one issue that comes to mind that voters might want to hear more about from Kamala Harris, from Donald Trump. But also, of course, because it gives her another chance to create and show voters the contrast between her and Donald Trump and what their presidencies would look like, what they both look like as human beings, and how erratic Donald Trump is. I think, lastly, a second debate would give voters the opportunity to really assess, I would argue, Donald Trump's mental acuity and whether and how he has, we could say at the very least, cognitive fatigue.
That's an interesting way to put it. Let me just say, with regard to gun control, it was rather a stunner. I think a lot of people were shocked when that just simple phrase acknowledging that both Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, less so for him, are gun owners. I think a lot of people were thinking, ooh, that was a shocker right there. But to your point, they didn't go on to talk about any policy. Let's talk about the Washington Post, which is highlighting which states the campaigns are focused on based on ad spending. And data shows that Harris is honing in on blue wall states like Michigan, while Trump is trying to lock down Georgia. Both are dropping the most cash, though, on Pennsylvania, Tim. What does this tell you about how both see their path to victory?
Yeah, Donald Trump's running a pretty incompetent campaign in a lot of ways, but whoever they have doing the ads knows what they're doing. They have a very clear inside straight path to just winning the states he won last time, plus Georgia and Pennsylvania. That's it. That's the victory for him. And you can see those are the two states where he's spending the most in.